Our next presenter is going to describe one way in which Arctic or near Arctic energy can benefit some of those near Arctic markets, and I would ask Dr. Gunnar Haraldsson to come forward and explain his proposal.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizer for inviting me here. I arrived this morning, and this has been a really thought-provoking discussions that I've been listening to. I'm a director of the Institute of Economic Studies, and regretfully, it's not my proposal that I'll present here, because I don't have any proposal to present. Actually, what we did recently is that we did a study on the macroeconomic effects of having high-voltage cable from Iceland to Europe, or more specifically the UK. What I will do here today, I actually had a PowerPoint presentation, but I decided not to show it. What I will try to do here today is give you some of the main ingredients of this study we did, and I will link that to Arctic issues. Arctic, and I would say not just Arctic issues, but environmental issues, which are really interconnected. As you probably, most of you know, the Icelandic situation is somewhat special, as we are a country of 300,000 people with huge, at least relatively huge, energy sources. The problem is that those sources are mainly hydroelectric power plants and geothermal. And it goes without saying that this is sort of like the type of energy that's difficult to transport. That is to say, transport from Iceland to other countries. However, this has become technically feasible in later years. And what we were actually asked to do was to see if this was also economically feasible, or what the macroeconomic effects would be. It's well known in economic theory that if you connect two markets, the two markets will find an equilibrium price. And in the case of Iceland, this would mean that if we would lay a cable to the UK, for example, our national grid would be connected to the European grid. And as energy prices in Europe are higher than here, we could benefit from that price differential, and we could export energy from Iceland to Europe. Then at the same time, if there were periods that the prices were lower in Europe, we would import energy. But that's another story. We actually, just looking at the situation as it is in Iceland, what we were actually looking at were macroeconomic and welfare effects. And there are numerous positive welfare effects on Iceland that we saw. This could delay new investment in power generation, which would be, from our perspective, positive. There would be less need for surplus power in our national grid, probably a lower cost of production, and more efficient use of the grid that we have here in Iceland. It's also quite possible that we could harness more energy to sell abroad. In our study, we had to study two phases of this. That is to say, the investment phase itself, that is to say, the time period where we are laying the cable, building the cable, upgrading our national grid, etc., and then what happens after that. Icelandic policymakers were also quite interested in other effects, like what would be the effect on homes and companies, as it was quite probable that without having some specific measures in place, then energy prices would rise. There were other issues also, like urban issues. What would this mean to the urban fabric in Iceland? And also there was a question about government income and government assurances, which has to do with our credit ratings and stuff like that. it's clear that this would be a huge investment, and there would be inflows of investment and income due to laying the cable. And I will tell you right away, I will not tell you what the numerical outcomes were, because first of all, they are uncertain. And secondly, my apologies being an economist, and our results always depend on something. So if we change the assumptions, we just get a different answer. But still, I believe that what we did, we may be ignorant, but we're ignorant at a more sophisticated level. What interests me in the context of this energy summit is how it relates actually to Arctic energy issues. Because I think that Iceland, as many other Arctic regions, we are far away from the consumer markets. Whether we harness our energy through hydropower or wind or geothermal or even fossil fuels, we are far away from the big markets lying further south on the planet. We also have common the local difficulties of terrain and access, and climate itself can pose problems with harnessing and selling this energy. There are also environmental policy issues, and this is something that was touched upon this morning. The question we really had to ask ourselves when we were doing this analysis concerning laying a cable to Europe was this: what is the real price of energy in Iceland? We sort of know a lot about the production costs and the economic returns coming from there. These are just normal business calculations. We also had to look at the more general economic costs and benefits from this. And this was more complicated than we thought. There are crowding out effects due to the size of the investments, et cetera, et cetera. So we had to look at some socioeconomic aspects. But the third thing is concerning what is the real cost of energy production in Iceland is the environmental costs. What are the environmental damages that harnessing more energy will entail? Another thing that I think is very important and touches upon some of the subjects of this Arctic Energy Summit is that what we've learned is there's so much that affects us that is what we call in economics exogenous, that is outside of our realm, so to speak. There's nothing we can do about it. Thinking about the selling our green, sustainable energy to the UK or to Europe in general, that hinges a lot upon things like, will Europe really go along with phasing out fossil fuels? Will they still pay a premium for sustainable energy? So we see that there are, this is something that my fellow panelists, the political scientists, have to answer. Those are political questions and those are political risks. There are also the risks I mentioned before, environmental risks, economic risks, and political risks. I think we must keep in mind that the Arctic, even though it's a specific area with specific characteristics, we are already connected through the rest of the world. And what the rest of the world does has a lot of effect on how the possibilities that we have and how we can gain or lose. And so that is my main message. What we need to do, actually, is what we did was just the first step in an analysis of this sort. What we need to do is to do a more comprehensive cost-benefit analysis, taking into considerations both the environmental costs, or the risks, rather, and political risk, so to speak. So that was what I want to say here today. I'm willing to answer glad to answer any questions that might come up. Thank you very much.